Hello everybody, this is Quinn from Enter the Sketch, and today I'm going to be sketching at a park called Nam Chong. I'll be sketching a bench area, as you can see on the upper left hand side there. I'm just quickly laying down some construction lines using my just a standard 2B pencil. Um, so when you're doing the construction lines, when you quickly just laying down the lines, you're not really worrying about accuracy. You can see I was checking my watch there. I don't have much time. This will be about 30 minutes or so of sketching, and I will finish the rest at home, as you'll see later in the video. But anyway, when you're sketching, when you're laying down the construction lines with your 2B pencil or HB pencil or whatnot, you're just quickly laying down the basic big shapes, the outline shapes of the what you're trying to draw mostly. Not worrying too much about detail. You're just laying enough lines to help guide you when you get to the inking process, where you're able to not worry too much about your perspective or where things are compositionally. You're just really just inking in a more detailed fashion that you'll see later on. I think this is the moment I realized I did not bring my pen that I normally draw with. I normally draw with a Pilot Parallel pen, a 1.5 mm. But luckily for me, I have just a regular ballpoint pen, as you can see. I'm using. Not ideal for me, but it still works. So right now, as you can see, I'm just laying down the ink lines using my construction lines as a guide. I have it all set there for the composition and where things are, so once the inking process comes into play, it's a lot easier for me just to move my pen freely without worrying too much about where things need to be. So right now I'm working on the palm trees there. I love drawing palm trees, to be honest. It's one of the most relaxing, or any tree for that matter, because it's so free. I feel free when I draw that. It's not like a building where the structures are the way it is perspective wise, and you just have to draw it how it is. Trees can sway in the wind. It can do pretty much whatever it wants, right? And it's sort of, I don't know, it's just relaxing to draw that. And I think that if you ever run into a problem where you don't know what to draw and maybe you're not up for something so complicated and you just want to relax, trees are probably one of the best things to draw, for sure. So as you notice now, I am working on the grass area and inking the bushes and shrubs. And when I'm inking shrubs, I try to do continuous lines sometimes when necessary, because we're just trying to show a little bit of it through the ink. Because once you get to the watercoloring is going to be the one that carries most of the weight. So right now there are some small palm trees in the front of the shrubs that I'm working on. I'm drawing the poles there and the ropes that's holding them down. So when it comes to ink and watercolor, there's a interesting dilemma that you always face when you're doing an art piece, because you're basically using two different mediums. You're using ink or line art with watercolor. And on one hand, ink gives you a lot of control over how much detail you want to add to your art. As you can see me working right now, adding some detail to that bench area along with the small palm trees in front of it. Back to my point here is that it's interesting because you want to find a balance between giving enough attention to your line work and enough attention for the watercoloring, where both isn't stepping on each other's toes in a way. You want both to shine in the end, but some art pieces calls for more line work than others, and some art pieces calls for more watercoloring than line work. You just have to be the one to decide which one you want to go with. And in this art piece, I'm trying to go for a balance between both. But definitely there are times where I go into a lot of detail with my inking and my line work, but there's other times where I don't, and it really depends on the image. So you learn to balance between both as you get more experience, and it's just like life, and that's why I like art so much, and especially ink and watercolor. It's because on one hand, with the ink and the line work, you have a lot of control of where you want to go. But watercolor or water in general, you don't have a whole lot of control sometimes, so you have to be able to let go in that regard. And like in life, sometimes you have control, sometimes you don't, but to learn to balance between what you can control and what you can't, that's really what it all comes down to. So right now I am pulling out my watercolor gear here, checking my time again, seeing how much time I have left. So I think the first thing I clipped on there was the water, and now I'm clipping on a magnet clip to put my watercolor palette. And that blue band you see me just put on my wrist, that's to dampen the water brush, my brush when it has too much water on there. And I've seen this trick by somebody, I forgot who was her name, but it comes in handy. So yeah, that's my tiny palette that you get to see here in a moment. And mind you, this is the first time I use a setup out here. Normally I have a standing easel when I draw outside, and I don't do it often, but that's how I normally draw outside. But the reason I'm having a light setup now is because I want to be able to draw more often in more of a spontaneous way, where the stuff I'm bringing with me is not so heavy. And especially when I'm going on holidays or vacations, I want to be able to draw more often, and so I figure that this light setup would help me do that. So right now I am deciding what kind of colors I want to add in the back, and normally you want to add a little bit lighter. You want to work from light to dark when it comes to watercolor, and so I'm kind of go for a light green, maybe like an olive green. So I'm gonna mix the emerald green together with some green and a touch of cadmium yellow medium. But first, before we do that, I'm gonna add a little bit of color. I'm gonna add a little bit of water in the back. Wet this down a bit so we can do a smooth wash, even wash in the back to start, and work our way down to that bench area. So I'm going to work from the top here, adding that light green in the back. I'm going to blend that into the trees as well. I'm going to work my way down slowly. So adding a little bit more water again. Just trying to dilute as much as I need. Then as I'm going down here, the colors get a little darker as you see me grab a little more green. Because from this image, I remember that the sunlight is going to be coming from the top right there in the back of the bench area. So as you go down, of course, shadow is going to be hitting that area more. I'm going back up here to add a little bit of lighter greens to the palm trees to make it stand out. So when you're working with nature, especially, everything's like green, right? But when you look closely, there's a lot of different colors. So that's why I'm trying to add some interest by adding a little bit more brown in there. Having a little bit more brown and reds. As you can see me grabbing some orange there, some cadmium light red actually. So yeah, there's a fine balance between keeping the colors true to life and adding kind of your perspective on things, a little spin on things, and add whatever colors you feel can help bring out the image in a more interesting or colorful way. And that's the beauty of watercolor. I think the more colors you have on your art, the better. So right now I am working on that bench area, the roofing, trying to add a little bit of a blue hue to it by adding some cerulean blue. So I'm adding a little bit of green, more greens to the grass area. This one's a little brighter green, so it's emerald green. I'm gonna be adding a touch of lemon yellow to add a little bit of interest and just to break up the greens in that area a bit. And right now I'm just trying to add some darkness in the bottom area, trying to make it more earthy by adding a little bit of raw sienna. Gonna try to add some variation to the grass by adding a little bit darker green. So right now you see me trying to mix a darker green with a different variation to it, maybe like a slate blue. And so I mixed some emerald green with ultramarine and a touch of sepia. Now I'm working on the palm trees here. And I also remembered that I have some small palm trees at the bottom too, so I'm gonna add colors to that area as well. This is to try to bring these to the foreground because these trees are much closer to me than the ones in the back. So you want to kind of break that up and make sure that depth is there. So now, just as I mentioned before, these distant trees, these trees that's a little bit farther away, I'm going to add a little bit lighter green in there. Now I'm going to go back to try to add a little bit more red, purple colors in there for the shadows, with a mixture of a little bit of golden deep with the carmine and ultramarine. Working my way down to the bottom area, trying to keep that area relatively the same kind of color with that purplish color. I had too much water over there, too much paint, so had to pull out the tissue and get that out. and kind of reestablish the color that I actually wanted. So a little bit ultramarine, trying to add a little blue down here. Didn't like the purple. I want to break that color up a bit. So I'm going for kind of a blue hue down here for the shadows. And that's another thing that's nice about watercolors, that you're able to, if you catch it quick enough and if your paint had enough water, you can always grab your tissue and soak up that mistake and go right back at it. But at the same time, don't worry too much about making mistakes, to be honest. Just go with the flow of what the water is giving you. And because most of the time, watercolor will surprise you. Some of the mistakes you do make ends up being very pleasant mistakes. So kind of like what Bob Ross said, they can be happy accidents. And you often find that quite a bit using watercolor as a medium. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm keeping the image, keeping the composition with a balance between darkness and light colors. So that's why you saw me use the tissue once again on that side, the left side of that art. I just want to make sure that everything is there for a reason. And now I am continuing using the ultramarine with a bit of green here to make it darker. So now I'm going to be adding a little bit more shadows in the shrubs and the bushes, along with the grass as well. Trying to create some shadows there to show that there are trees that's not in view of this art, but they're casting a shadow. Gonna go in back to the bench area with the darker Payne's gray color. Now I'm adding a little bit of a raw sienna to that mix to start painting the tree trunks. So right now I'm trying to do a darker mix once again, a little bit of sepia and ultramarine. I'm gonna go back to the palm trees, I believe, to try to add these colors in there. Try to bring in more depth to the palm trees. And always make sure that the bottom of your trees is darker than the top, to make sure that especially when there's sunlight in the back or on top of the trees, you want to make sure that the colors are lighter on top. Going back to the bench area again, using that same mixture, I'm going back to the bushes. Make sure that area is getting enough shadows. Again, you can see I'm trying to mix a sort of a purple color with a hint of blue. So that's a darker color to really bring out the shadows. As you can see, my palette is very tiny. It's smaller than a credit card. So the mixing area isn't very big, obviously. So I'm not too fussy about what kind of colors comes out of my mixture. Sometimes if I see a purple color and I want to use that, or if I want to make that darker or lighter, I add the appropriate mixture to it to get what I want. So I added some ultramarine to that mix, and now I'm adding some emerald green with some green. Just trying to add some darker colors to that bench area to bring that out. Making sure I'm hitting those small palm trees along the way. And of course the bigger ones too. Adding a little bit of variations to the shadows on the bottom, along the bushes and the grass area. So now I'm going to be adding a little bit of lemon yellow to the mixture. Lighten it up so we can start painting the back trees there. Making sure the trees in the back are lighter than the front to give the illusion of depth. So now I'm trying to add some ultramarine to that mixture to add some shadows in the back and some underneath the bench area. As you can see from this image, there's a lot of greens, as I mentioned before. So our job is to try to balance out the greens with different variations of hues like blue, yellow, a touch of orange or red or browns to add some variation and add some interest, because when everything's green it can be pretty mundane and pretty boring to look at. So try to break up the colors a little bit so it can be more interesting to look at. So right now I'm using the smaller brush on the other side of my dual brush here. So again, I'm going to be adding some variation greens to the palm trees, to the small palm trees here. Much lighter green there. Trying to go for more of an olive green. Now I'm adding some emerald green to the mix, along with some ultramarine. Trying to brighten it up. Trying to add some more interest to the palm trees there. I think that green ended up being a little too bright for my taste, but I'm gonna go back and play around with it and see where it goes. And now you notice that yes, that green was a little too green for me, so just using my tissue, rub it off and start over here. I'm trying to go for more of an olive green, I believe, so I'm gonna add that there, and I think that green is a little bit more subtle, which is better. So again, I'm gonna have to do the same thing on this side. So we're gonna add that back there. And when you're not sure when using watercolor, just make sure your mix is more watery, just to test colors out, see if you like them, because sometimes you end up not liking them too much, and you can always kind of soak the paint up with the tissue like I did, and kind of reset. So now going in there with the darker purple mix here by a combination of ultramarine and carmine. I'm going to be adding these little touches of shadows to the shrubs and the bushes with quick, deliberate, direct strokes with my tiny, my thin brush here. And I believe we're kind of running down to the wire here. I was in a rush, but I'm almost done enough with the base that I'll finish the rest at home. And yeah, this was the first time I actually filmed myself outside drawing, and I was using a selfie stick that wasn't very tall, and so the best I could do when I was sitting on this bench was an over-the-shoulder shot like this. Even though it's a dynamic shot, which I kind of appreciated, it's not an ideal shot to see the colors I was using very clearly. But once we get to the next segment where I'm at home, the view will be a lot better. It'll be more of a straight on shot where you can see the entire image and watercolor palette. So it looks like I'm pretty much done here. I'm checking my time because I had to go, and we'll see what I do at home here in a bit. So back at home, I finally got my Pilot Parallel pen 1.5 mm. So this is the pen that I was supposed to have at the park, but I didn't. I like this pen because it can give you a lot of dynamic lines that you see now. Some much thicker lines, some thin lines, all kinds of lines that you need to try to give your image that dramatic effect, which I like. So this is the speed up version of me drawing, adding those ink lines before we get to the watercoloring. And sometimes I like to add little fine details, so I'll use a Micron .005 fine liner pen, and here you can see me doing that just before the watercoloring. So now here at the watercoloring at home, finally there's a straight down view of my entire page here. So I'm going to be using some cerulean blue, and I'm going to be adding that in the back. I would want a little bit more blue in the back with a hint of ultramarine. So we're going to apply that to the back of those trees there to add a little bit more contrast to the image. And you can see that I'm applying a combination of ultramarine and carmine to now add a little bit of some purple in there. You know, we got a lot of blues in there, so let's add some purple to break up the image a little bit and bring it a lot more depth, especially between the leaves in the palm trees. You want to make sure that allows the image to kind of pop in a way. With more shadows and shade, it's going to really make your image come to life. And I think for me anyway, this is the fun part of the watercoloring process, is when you start adding the shadows and the shading. That's really the fun part, because you can really see the image come to life right in front of your very eyes in real time, and it's a pleasure to see. So have fun with it. So I'm just going to be working my way around this image and applying shadows and shade where is necessary. And remember, the sunlight was coming from basically the right side of the image, top right. So we just got to keep that in mind as I'm working my way through the image with a purple blue hint color to add the shadows and the shade. And you can use any combination of color mixture you want for this. I think normally I like to stick with a purple over blue color, but I kind of bounce between both. Sometimes I would do the blue as an under painting, and then on top of it will be a purple to give the shadow a little bit more variation and interest. So you can just play around with that and really use whatever colors come to your mind and whatever colors you want to use that brings out the best in the image for you. And it really all depends on how you feel during the day. Sometimes you feel like you want to add a little bit more purple or a little bit more blue. You can do that. Because in your world, nothing's wrong. You can put your stamp on this image. Even though it was a real life location, it doesn't mean that I have to make everything exactly the way it was. You can add whatever colors you feel necessary to make the image suit your needs and suit your taste. So continue to add shadow and shade in the grass area and the trees. So this is the dual brush I'm talking about from Simi Art. I'll probably have a review up at some point about this. One side is the thicker brush and the other side is a thinner brush, which comes in handy when you're out and about. So here I am probably going in there and adding a little bit more details to everything. So just taking a good look at my image, making sure I got all the base shadows down, and now I'm just going to be adding some more details around the image, like stronger shadows around the trees and the shrubs. I'm still using a little bit of a hint of blue down there with ultramarine. Just adding a little bit of blue on top of the roofings and some of the structures in the back. So now with a shade of purple, I will go back and add some tree trunks in the far distance there, because there were some trees in the back of those palm trees. But you don't want to use ink in this area because I think it'll be a little too overwhelming. It'll add a little too much detail. So to add some softness to the image for distant trees, I'm going to just use the brush, probably with a combination of Payne's Gray and Carmine and a hint of ultramarine for that, to get that effect. And I've talked about this before earlier in the video, that sometimes you have to balance between ink work and painting. And in this case, you don't want the ink work to be added because it will just be a little bit too much detail in that area. You want a little bit more subtleness, and the best way to get some subtle imagery is to use your brush. So you see me just with a quick upward motion with the brush, I can add some tree trunks in the distance. It gives your sketch a lot more dimension when you do this. The combination of line work and painting goes hand in hand, and so look for those kind of opportunities to kind of capitalize on those moments to add more depth to your drawing. So right now I'm going to add a little bit of blades of grass sticking out. Not every single blade of grass, but just to accentuate some of it. This is green, a little brighter green, by using some emerald green and green and to add to the drawing itself. Sometimes I like to do this to, to make it more interesting to look at. And like I said, you don't have to add every blade of grass, but just to accentuate some of it. This brings a little nice touch to the final piece. So now I'm going to wet my paper in the back to add a little bit of clouds and sky to the background to finish up this sketch. So it's going to add some cerulean blue to the water in the back, and just to finish up the sky there. And this is not something too complicated. You're just adding the paint into the water, and really the water is doing most of the work as it spreads the sky out evenly. And you can always add a little bit more water in there too as you go to kind of soften some of the harder edges. And right now I'm just adding some ultramarine to the cerulean blue so I can make the top of my sky darker. As simple as that may sound, that's the one thing that you have to remember, is the top of the sky is always going to be darker than the bottom, because as the sky gets closer to the horizon, it's going to be a little warmer. And that's about it. I hope you liked this video, and if you do, please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, whoever you are, wherever you are, I wish you nothing but the best. Take care.